Thank you. Thanks. Okay, I'm so glad I'm here because if we're gonna live forever, we need to figure out how are we going to make all of our food. So some of the suggestions we're hearing are we need to eat less meat, eat chicken or fish instead of red meat, eat more plants, eat more healthy whole grains, or maybe just everything in moderation, less fat. And in America, a really big thing right now is lab meat. Have you guys heard of Impossible Burger? They can now make meat that bleeds in labs. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more. And then indoor plant production. And I did see a really great example. I've had some time to visit some farms, and I visited this geothermal tomato house that you guys have here. It's a little different than some of the other solutions they're coming up with in America right now with 100% artificial light, which makes no sense at all. So how are we going to produce our food if we live forever? Impossible Burger and these other lab meats are getting a lot of funding from the tech scene right now. They're touted as more humane because no animals have died for this. They're healthier and more environmentally sound because cows emit so much methane and are destroying our planet. But the problem is we don't have unlimited resources here on Earth, and you can't make something out of nothing. And that's something that I think is really missing from the tech scene. It's almost like that, just go into a lab and just make it, right? Like one of these 3D printers. You just kind of make the meat, and without thinking about the inputs. And so I want to walk you through a thought experiment just to explain a little bit why biodiversity is so important in our food system. Okay, so if I gave you a little island and you were to make a sustainable food system, the first thing you might start with is grass. Okay, so we're going to call this grass world. And here on Grass World, we've got one crop, grass. And with nothing to eat it, nothing to fertilize it, nothing to, clip it down with, what happens after a couple of seasons on Grass World? Dead Grass World. Okay, we had no fertilizer, we had nothing to stimulate its growth, and so it just died. Okay, so we're going to start over again, and we're going to have grass and cow world. Okay, so now we've got an animal that can fertilize the grass. The chomping on the grass can stimulate new growth, just like clipping your lawn with a lawnmower. The urination actually provides more nutrients from the cow. But the problem is, if you just have lots of cows on the grass, what do you think is going to happen? Overgrazing, right? And then you've got too many cows, and then the grass dies and the cows die. Okay, so that didn't work either. We're back to the previous slide of what grass world looks like, only with some dead cows all over it. So, what can we do about this situation? What about grass cow wolf world? Okay, so what is the role of the wolf here? Wolves are apex species, right? So they, or keystone species rather, they help keep the grasses and the herd of cattle healthy. And they do this by moving the herds along, right? The herds can't stay in one place too long because they'll just get picked off, right? So as they're moving, the weaker ones, the older ones, are consumed by the wolves, so their populations are kept in check. And also, the grass doesn't get overgrazed because it's eaten and then it's given a rest because the herds are moving on. All right? But it's still kind of a delicate situation because you only have 3 species here. So what happens if a virus comes and annihilates any one of these 3 species? You're back to dead grass again with all the wolves and the cows dying. So predators can help maintain health. So here's African savanna with wildebeests, and you can see they're all in a very tight herd, and they move across the grasslands, grazing, stomping, fertilizing it with their manure, moving on, allowing the grasslands to have a rest, which actually makes them stronger and can help sequester carbon by doing this. And so in modern farming, we can actually mimic nature by something called mob grazing. It's called lots of different things, intensive management, but with good management techniques, you can actually mimic the predator relationship. So we can cull, so we can harvest some of the cattle for our own nutrition. And then with electric fencing, we can have them in very tight bunches, grazing and then moving. So something like this is a lot healthier than just random scattered cows over one big area. When that happens, the cows will graze their favorite grasses, they'll overgraze those grasses die, the less desirable grasses are the ones that survive, and it doesn't work as well. So what I'm trying to get to is basically that complexity equals resilience. What you want is a lot of life in an area. Once, if we took grass, cow, wolf world and then added some other animals, here are some snakes, we can have other predators, we can have other animals grazing the grass, we can have different types of vegetation, we can have gorillas, all these different animals are all correlated. And that's what makes a truly healthy ecosystem. What are we doing with our modern food production? Have we created grass world? All right. And what happens with our super eco lab meat? What is the input for that? It's soy. Okay, these vast, vast fields of just one crop. Okay, how does that get fertilized? It's either, possibly organic ways with animal inputs, or most likely chemical inputs from fossil fuels. So very, very fragile system, not at all diverse, not at all resilient. And this is what's happening to our food. This is what's going on right now. And so what we've got right now with lab meat is complete nonsense. So think of all the inputs you would need to make this lab meat. You need water for the irrigation, processing, mixing of it. You need pesticides and herbicides, mining of minerals. Okay, we've got wars happening over minerals right now. We're running low on minerals. We've got fossil fuels needed for tilling, extracting the oils. We've got materials for packaging, concrete and steel for this laboratory, the energy source for the lighting. Now, imagine if we could create a product that provided nutrient-dense food with very little input. What would that look like? A ruminant, okay? So maybe cattle in the US, maybe lamb here in Iceland, okay? So we've got, again, the chomping on the grass stimulates the growth. They're adding manure and urine, which is inoculating the soil with healthy bacteria, providing incredible biodiversity underground as well as above ground, sequestering carbon, and utilizing photosynthesis for energy. And again, I'm not arguing for factory farming, anything like that, but when we're talking about grass-fed, well-managed animals, this is the optimal food source for humans. They can eat food that we can't digest, grass, on land that we can't crop. So this is a very important thing because a lot of people say, well, animal farming takes up so much land. But the thing is, you can't grow crops everywhere. So I can't crop most of Iceland. I've drove around this country. There's no way. You guys don't have great soil here at all. And it gets kind of cold. I did not see a lot of grain farms. I saw a lot of sheep, which do very well on your landscape here, and that's fantastic. And I saw some goats too. And what's going on with even the Icelandic diet now? What are you guys being told? Eat less lamb, and chicken consumption has now taken over and surpassed lamb consumption. What do chickens eat? Grains. So probably not grown on Iceland. All right, so 70% of the world's surface is not suitable for crop production. This is a picture that I took driving around Iceland. And again, we need to inoculate the soil with good bacteria. How are we going to do that in a monocrop system? Okay, so Monsanto, you guys have heard of Monsanto, right? They're now coming out with bacteria. They're trying to engineer special bacteria that they can sell to farmers to use in the fields. But the great thing is we can actually get it for free from cattle. Water is a huge issue too. In California, agriculture is 2% of the economy, but uses 80% of the water. And we've got 99% of our almonds, walnuts, and a large percentage of other produce is grown in basically a desert where the water is pumped from underground and pretty much wasted because it just gets evaporated. And a lot of these almonds and other foods we're just exporting out. So we're exporting out our water, and our residents don't have water to drink in a lot of these towns. Again, the chomping on the grass from the ruminants stimulates grass growth. It shortens the roots when it gets chomped, but then it allows, during the resting period, it allows for rapid root growth and allows the plant to be a lot stronger than if it didn't get eaten at all and just sort of laid down and died. Okay, and I know, cows emit tons and tons of methane, but what a lot of these studies aren't looking at is the entire cycle, okay? So in a healthy system where you've got animals that are spread out a little bit more, able to, leave their manure and then move on, methane is not a huge issue, and there's bacteria that have developed that actually eat the methane, okay? So there has, before, in America, before we killed off all the bison, there were many, many more ruminants in North America than there are today, and methane was not an issue. The other great thing about animals is that they're incredibly low maintenance. So I was driving around, and the sheep were just hanging out, right? And then I went to the tomato house, which was awesome. I love the geothermal, definitely a much more sustainable system than 100% artificial lights. But this guy was working pretty hard, and there was a lot of energy that was required to produce tomatoes. And if you try to, if you think beef compared to a tomato, what's giving us the most nutrition here? Animals are renewable. And context matters. So on our farm, we have farm interns. Right now, we've got a guy who is from the Andes in Peru. We've got people from all over the world that come and study and work on our farm. And guinea pig work really great for them because not everybody has refrigeration. They need a small animal that they can kind of, take care. They don't have deep chest freezers to invest in half a cow, share, or large lamb. So for them, guinea pigs are the most sustainable option. So, depending on, the culture and the different environment of where you're looking, it might look like a different type of animal. The other problem with a plant-based diet is the fats. And we have to think about how much land are we going to devote to growing things like canola, which is very beautiful, actually, in this field. But that takes up a lot of land, and it takes a lot of energy to extract the oil out of canola. We could be using this land for actual food production and then be eating the fat from the animals, which we're not doing right now. But aren't I trying to kill you with all this meat advice? And so most of the studies that compare vegetarians to omnivores are actually looking at someone like on a standard Western diet compared to someone who's vegetarian, there's a lot of lifestyle differences that are not accounted for here. So vegetarians in general tend to do things like everything that was talked about today. They meditate, they might do some yoga, they probably don't smoke or drink as much as your standard, if you pick, your standard American. But when you adjust for all the confounding factors, there's no difference when you look at vegetarians versus non-vegetarians. This was a gigantic study that just came out very recently. And we're also bombarded with a lot of misinformation. So a lot of the plant-based community puts out information like this saying, well, you can get more protein from broccoli than you can from beef. But what they're not looking at, first of all, is this is 2 ounces of beef in 100 calories versus 2 cups of broccoli. So that's if anyone's tried to eat 2 cups of broccoli, that's pretty hard to get down. Their data was actually wrong. So 100 calories of beef is actually 13 grams of protein, and 100 calories of broccoli is only 7 grams of protein. But per weight, beef has 21 grams of protein per 100 grams and is more easily digested, is a more complete protein, versus broccoli. If you were to weigh the same amount, you've got 3 grams of protein per 100 grams of broccoli, and it's not a complete protein and is a lot more difficult to digest than animal products. So how much protein do we really need? And I looked at the recommendations, the RDA for Americans, and found out that 0.8 grams per kilogram is actually the minimum requirement to avoid disease. It is not the optimal level of protein. And they made a nice little calculation for us because we don't know kilograms and we don't like to do math. So they converted it to 56 grams of protein for men and 46 grams of protein for women. And you're going to see those 2 numbers everywhere when you look at the dietary recommendations. But they're using a reference man of 154 pounds and a reference woman of 125 pounds. So these numbers, 56 grams for men and 46 grams for women, is the minimum amount to avoid muscle loss for 0.8 grams per kilogram. So that's for these 154-pound man and 125-pound women. But what the average weights are is for an average man in America, 195 pounds, and the average woman is 166 pounds. So by going by the 0.8 grams per kilogram calculations, the minimum requirement, to avoid muscle loss, 71 grams for men and 60 grams for women. Okay, so that's a lot more than the recommendations that we're being told. There's also another set of recommendations called the ADMR or AMDR, which is 10 to 35% of calories from protein. So on a 2,000 calorie diet, that's about 100 grams of protein per day at 20%, which is totally reasonable and conservative, actually. There's a lot of papers that suggest that those who are elderly with chronic disease, if you're looking to lose weight, if you've got any sort of metabolic derangement, athletes, or are highly stressed, so probably almost everybody in this room would raise their hand at one of those things, a higher protein diet is actually going to be beneficial. But aren't you going to not live forever if you eat too much protein? So there is some rumblings around that, it can increase mTOR and IGF-1, but in a regular person that I would see walking into my office, they're metabolically broken. They're eating too many carbohydrates because of lack of protein, and calorie restriction, everything in moderation, just doesn't work for people. What does work is bumping up their protein to 20% of calories. So I start everyone who walks into my practice at least 100 grams of protein a day, which is always more than what they're eating. And, I think there needs to be a balance between longevity and feeling great, right? And if you have enough protein, you're going to be strong, metabolically fit, happy, and active. And that's how I want to feel, not necessarily just, make it to 85. So are we eating too much meat? Actually, our red meat consumption in America has gone way down. Our poultry has gone way up. Worldwide, it's gone way up. Seafood just up a little bit. Vegetable oils, way, way up since 1970. It's dramatic. Grain intake and caloric sweeteners. So while red meat is being vilified, it's actually not what Americans are eating more of. And when we look at the world's population, 30% are anemic. So we're not going to get there with more salad, more whole grains, and more vegetable oils. Here in Iceland, consumption is down 70% from 1983, which was 70% of meat consumption was lamb, and now it's about a quarter, even less than that. Chicken and pork are totally taken over. So in 1983 in Iceland, chicken consumption was only 4.3 kilograms, and in 2013 it was 27 per year per person. Pork was 4.9 and is now 19. And again, what did chicken and pork eat? Grains. They're very high in omega-6. What does lamb eat? Grass. All right, and I actually met with a lamb farmer who was telling us that the government is now wanting to reduce the number of lamb farms here in Iceland, which I think is the biggest mistake you can possibly make for both the health of Icelanders and also for the health of your land. Because what's going to happen to the land if you take the lamb off? It's going to turn into grass world. You actually need them eating, pooping, living on your land in order to keep it healthy. It's going to be a huge problem for you. But why eat meat if you can get all your protein from plants? So here's another image that I've taken from the internet. And again, we've got 46 grams and 56 grams. So that's sort of just the assumed, that's all we need for protein. And look at how much protein you can get from lentils and black beans and potatoes. But when you compare it to meat, and I've got this on my website in a post called More Protein, Better Protein, you can get 30 grams of protein from 137 calories worth of fish or 700 calories worth of peanut butter. So meat is, if we're looking to reduce our caloric intake and yet get more protein, which is the most satiating of the macronutrients, animal products are the best way to do it. A better plant-based option would be legumes compared to things like soy milk, potatoes, and bread. And then you see a lot of these hierarchies. So we've got, I apologize, this is not very clear, but we've got, cattle as the worst thing you can possibly eat. And then, fish and chicken are a little bit better. Eggs, we move into vegetarian category, then vegan, raw vegan, Jain, fruitarian, and the breatharians, right? And the problem is, in nature, there is no hierarchy. There's only hunger. Everything eats and is eaten. And I would actually argue that ruminants, environmentally and ethically, are the best, because think about how many people one large cow can feed. So a 1,200-pound steer can provide almost 500 pounds of meat. That's one life, right? Think about all the things that die in the production of grain. So you've got, the mice living in the field, you've got the pesticides. How did you get that cropland to, happen initially? You had to either clear a forest, clear a grassland, you had to displace tons of animals. And unless it's done organically, again, you've got chemicals that are being applied that are killing bees and butterflies. the decapitation of the small mammals that are in the fields with tractors. So blood is spilled either way, whether you want to accept it or not. And I would actually argue that according to the principle of least harm, one grass-fed ruminant is causing less harm than a diet of only plants. But unfortunately, this is how we relate to animals. So we're so far removed from our food production system that we just see all animals as cute, fuzzy little pets that are basically our children, right? And this is how we relate to food. And this is how we live. We live today in pretty much CAFOs, confined animal feeding operations. This is pretty much how we're packing people in these days. We're overstimulated and disconnected. And our worldviews are really off, I think. And I wanted to talk about this briefly, and this actually ties in really nicely to the presentation right before me. But if you think about why you're here, there's three different main worldviews you can have. There's the pre-materialists. So we're here because someone put us here. There's a supernatural source of authority that is guiding us through our life here. Okay, we've got the materialists, which is also reductionism, modernism, and that philosophy pretty much thinks that the world is here for us to just extract. So everything, humans are at the top, and everything underneath us is here for our pleasure, okay? We invent our own reason for living. And then there's the post-materialists who believe that we probably haven't figured everything out, that we probably shouldn't be imposing our own wills on nature, and that we need to figure out how we fit within the cycle. So again, we've got, do we own nature? Are humans really that important? Are we really at the top? Or are we just part of the web? So if you think about how, we're just sort of a collection of different molecules that's getting recycled into everything else, right? So if Earth is just one big ecosystem, our cells are just on loan. So everything eats and is eaten. We're just going to get recycled back into the earth and get eaten too by soil bacteria to feed new things. And I think one of the biggest problems is that people just are so out of touch with that type of thinking. So that's it. You can find more about me here and on Instagram, and I'm working on a book and a film actually about all this stuff.